Thank you, Mark, and welcome to Sabbath Services, everyone. It's nice to see you all again on this sunny day. When was the last time you ever looked at a dashboard? Well, it was probably on the way here to church today in your vehicle. If you were driving, you probably had the dashboard right there in front of you. If you weren't driving, you might have been looking at the driver's dashboard to see how fast he was going, to see if he was doing everything okay. Now, why do you think vehicles have a dashboard? After all, every vehicle has a dashboard. I'm not sure the first one with Henry Ford, maybe he just put a stick in there and he started driving off and had no speedometer. But basically, every vehicle that we're familiar with has a dashboard. Well, what is the first thing you see on a dashboard when you get into your vehicle? What's the main thing you're looking at on a dashboard? The speedometer, right. So you're seeing how fast you're going. Do you think that's important? Probably. You don't want to be doing 85 in a 35 mile per hour zone, because not only might you get pulled over by the cops, you probably end up being arrested too for that. So it tells you your speed. What else does it tell you about that's important? It tells you how much fuel you have left. Can you imagine driving somewhere and not knowing how much fuel you have left? Now you're really guessing how much fuel do I have left. You know, there happened to be one time the fuel sensor wasn't working, so I had no idea what was going on. I was in my 20s back then, so I learned how to count how many miles I was going, which was another thing in my dashboard. I could see how many miles I was going and know how to fill up on fuel. But I eventually got that fixed, and then I felt safer in my cars that I would not run out of gas. And what else does the dashboard tell you? We went over speed, we went over fuel, we went over the mileage. Well, how about your oil level? If your oil level is falling too low, that could ruin your engine. That's something you have to get taken care of right away. It tells you how many RPMs you're running at. And today, in modern vehicles, there's a lot of cool things on that dashboard. I tell you, when I first bought a new vehicle a few years ago, I was playing around with it like a kid in a candy store. I saw, look at this. It tells me how much tire pressure I got. This is awesome. Oh, the seatbelt indicator. When your passenger doesn't have their seatbelt on, you just say, honey, you please put your seatbelt on. That's really annoying. Then you have your turn signal indicator. That's important. You want to know if your turn signal is working. You have your high beams indicator for your high beams. Cruise control has all that stuff. Engine light. Check engine light. Now, I think we all have check engine light. Ding, 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 ding. Why is that engine light going on? Take it to AutoZone. Sir, it looks like that your engine light is on because of this right here. Okay, how do you fix it? Well, I don't know exactly what it is, sir. Take it to a mechanic. Go to the mechanic. $100, sir, to figure this out. All right, pay $100. All right, it'll cost $2,000 to fix it. Oh, okay. So I'm sure we all experienced with the check engine light. You never know what it's going to mean. They can tell you, point to a section in the engine where it might be wrong, but they're not going to really know what's going on and why it's on until they actually dig into it. So they charge you a lot of money. That's why mechanics charge that kind, because it takes a lot of work. You have your brake warning lights. You have your battery charging warning light. Of course, I talked about the engine temperature. You know, if your coolant is low, it tells you that too. No one wants a hot engine, then it blows up, and your engine catches on fire, and there goes your car. So the check engine light and then everything else on the dashboard, as you can tell, is very important. But the vehicle is not the only thing with the dashboard. Now think about it. Airplanes, you know. Do you think pilots need to know a lot? Oh, they need to know a lot. Just look at an airplane dashboard. It's got to tell you the calibrated airspeed. It's got to tell you the altitude, how high they are, the heading. It has to tell you what the attitude is. Does anyone know what the attitude in a plane is? I didn't know. I looked it up. It's the angular difference measured between an airplane's axis and the line of the Earth's horizon. So I guess they have to see that angular difference where the airplane's axis and the line of the Earth's horizon is. It tells you your vertical speed in an airplane, the yaw, side-to-side movement of the nose of the aircraft. So you see a dashboard is even more important in an airplane. And you're going to want your pilot to have a really nice dashboard when you're flying on an airline, because you don't want to accidentally hit a mountain or go down somewhere, and, you know, that can be pretty bad consequences. And speaking of dashboards, even businesses have dashboards. Now, a business dashboard is more like an Excel spreadsheet where it has columns, and you have important things in there that you probably need to know if you're running your own business, like cash in the bank. If you don't have cash, you probably are not running that much longer in your business. And then you have these KPIs, which are called key performance indicators. These are key performance indicators that a manager or owner of a business needs in order to know how well the business is running. It may tell you the number of leads that came in, for example, for sales, the cost per lead, the return on investment per lead. If you're selling a service or a product, obviously you're selling something there, you want to know how much profit are you making on that service or product, customer satisfaction, client retention rate. So you have this all measured on a business, for a business on a dashboard in a spreadsheet. So basically, the point is, if you can measure it, then you can put it on the dashboard. People in their personal lives may have dashboards, may tell them about their goals, how well are they on track to meet their goals, and they keep track of it on their dashboard every day. So as you can see, dashboards are used for a variety of things. But the one thing we see clearly is that what do dashboards do for us? Dashboards give us an overall view of how our vehicle, airplane, business, life, anything else is operating. Are we operating efficiently? Are we inefficient? Are there warning lights going off? If there's a warning light going off, you better dig into it, because whatever you're running is not going to be running much longer. It tells us basically something is wrong, so we have to look into what the problem is. So thinking about this, did you ever think about doing a spiritual dashboard? Just think about that, a spiritual dashboard. A spiritual dashboard will tell you how your spiritual life is going. Are you on the right track with God? Or are you on the wrong track with God? Do you have a bad habit that's causing you to fall away from God? On the other side of the coin, do you have a good habit? Are you getting spiritually better? I think it's something good to talk about, especially as we get closer to the Passover season, where we examine ourselves spiritually. So what kind of things would we have on this spiritual dashboard? And what indicators will be on there? What warning lights will be on there? If we're running it low on spiritual fuel, will a warning light go off? Ding, 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 ding. Low on spiritual fuel, ready to run out of gas. So what important things are we going to have on this spiritual dashboard? Well, to start out, we're going to turn to Matthew 24. But Jesus Christ had given his Mount Olivet prophecy in Matthew 24 about the end time events and the signs of his coming. And then he went ahead and he gave us 4 parables about how we need to look for things and how we need to improve our lives before Christ's second coming. And the 4 parables he gave was the faithful servant and the evil servant, the wise and the foolish virgins, and the parable of the talents and the parables of the sheep and the goats. So we're going to look at these parables and see what warning lights and indicators we can have on our spiritual dashboard. So the first parable we're going to look at is the faithful and evil servant. Faithful servant and evil servant. And that's in Matthew 24 and verses 45 through 51. And this is what it says in verse 45 of chapter 24. And Christ is saying, "Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. And assuredly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if the evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him at an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint him portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So let's look into that parable and digest with what is going on. We first see a contrast. Christ is pointing out a faithful servant who is wise, an evil servant who obviously is not very wise. The faithful servant is wise because he's paying attention to his dashboard. He's making sure that the household is being properly run. He's trying to make sure that everyone has food in the household. He's working to make sure that he's ruling properly over his master's house. To get a better understanding of these scriptures, 45 through 47, we'll read the New Century Version, which says, "Who is the wise and loyal servant that the master trusts to give the other servants their food at the right time? When the master comes and finds the servant doing his work, the servant will be blessed. I will tell you the truth, the master will choose that servant to take care of everything he owns." So as you can see right here, what the servant is looking at is that they're going to get food at the right time. They're nourishing the people in the household. He's not only ensuring the household is being run properly, he's making sure they get food when they're hungry. So that probably makes more sense to say than in due season. And basically, God Christ is telling us that we should be able, in the church, to be able to nourish one another, help one another. We must be peacemakers. And we need to do this when Christ comes back. And he says to here that at the end that this wise servant will be put in charge of a lot of things in this kingdom. But when you flip the coin over and you look at the opposite side of the coin, what do you see is the evil servant. What do you see with him? It's the attitude. Notice the difference in attitude between the good and evil servant. Maybe that's something we need to put on our spiritual dashboard. How is my attitude? Attitude in the column. How is it? 10 with being great, 1 not being so great, 5 average. Well, you can tell the evil servant is not paying so much attention to his dashboard. What's he thinking about? He's only thinking about himself. He's only thinking about the now right now. He has no concerns about the consequences of his action. Look at him. I mean, this guy is beating up his fellow servants. He's eating and drinking with the drunkards. He's not disciplined. And if you read into this, it seems like he's not really trying that hard to follow his master's or God's way. He's not getting ready for Christ's return. He's not contributing to the health of the body. He's not contributing to the health of the household. He's not paying attention to his spiritual dashboard on how he's supposed to live. He's not even worried about his master returning. He is letting Satan get a foothold in his life with his negative traits. And what do we see the consequences of his actions? Well, it's obvious at the end of the parable, the consequences of his action is Christ says he is cut up at 2 in the end. He's not going to make it into God's family. He's ignoring God's way of life on purpose because he's treating everyone bad. And we as servants don't want to be like that. We don't want to be like the evil servant. We want to be like the wise servant, where we are nourishing our fellow servants when they are hungry. We need to nourish, like I said before, and uplift one another. So this is an awesome thing, an awesome light, a warning light that we need in our spiritual dashboard. We need to have this warning light with our attitude, how we treat each other also. How do we treat other people in God's church? So do we have warning lights here going off on our dashboard? If so, we need to dig into it. We need to look into what we're doing wrong. And we need to take it to the mechanic and get it fixed. It's kind of like seeing the warning light going off in your car dashboard for low oil level or low coolant before some major damage is done if we don't fix it. Now for the second parable. The second parable is about the 10 virgins. That's Matthew 25 in verses 1 through 13. And in this second parable, what we're going to read from the New Century Version is about these 10 virgins. And it says in verse 1, "At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids." So these are 10 bridesmaids who are getting ready to meet the groom. "And they took their lamps, and they went to wait for the bridegroom." And that's what people did back in the ancient days, and in some cultures today, they still do that, where you don't know what the hour is, the bridegroom is coming, but you have to be there and be ready for that wedding to start. Not even the bridegroom in some cultures know when he's coming. And in verse 2, Christ says 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. And the 5 foolish bridesmaids took their lamps, but the foolish ones did not take any more oil for the lamps to burn. The wise bridesmaids took their lamps and more oil in jars. Because the bridegroom was late, they became sleepy and went to sleep. Do you notice? All 10 of them went to sleep. Then at midnight someone cried, "The bridegroom is coming. Come and meet him." Then all the bridesmaids woke up and got their lamps ready. But the foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, because our lamps are going out." The wise bridesmaids answered, "No, the oil we have might not be enough for all of us. Go to the people who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." So while the 5 foolish bridesmaids went to buy oil, the bridegroom came. The bridesmaids who were ready went in with the bridegroom to the wedding feast, and then the door was closed and locked. Later, the others came back and said, "Sir, open the door to let us in." But the bridegroom answered, "I tell you the truth, I don't want to know you. So always be ready, because you don't know the day or the hour the Son of Man will come." So what do we notice about this and about what we can apply on our spiritual dashboard? The first thing we notice is that all 10 were virtuous. Excuse me. So all 10 bridesmaids were virtuous. They all had oil, which is symbolic of the Holy Spirit. So these are all people who are in God's church. They had oil in their lamps. They were baptized. They had the Holy Spirit. What else we notice is that they all had to wait for the bridegroom to come. So what did? They all slept. And the third thing we notice is that when the bridegroom finally came, the 5 foolish ones found out their oil was running low. And they had to run out and buy more oil. But the 5 wise ones brought enough oil. They had enough oil to keep the light on. And they were prepared. And what does that mean? Well, the 5 wise ones were focused during the time they were waiting for the bridegroom on godly attributes. They seemed to be active in staying close to God. They did use the tools God gave them of daily prayer, Bible study, meditation. They had discipline in trying to stay close to God. They allowed the Holy Spirit to lead them. The 5 foolish ones were not totally prepared. They had God's Holy Spirit, but they did not maintain the enthusiasm for God. They were not disciplined in staying close to God. They were not disciplined in using the tools that God gave them. They were not active in striving to live God's way of life. So what we learn is that you don't want to be like the 5 foolish bridesmaids, the 5 foolish virgins. You want to be like the 5 wise ones. We have so many ways now, for example, that we can study and read the Bible. You can do it on hard copy. You can read it on your apps. You can listen to it. There are so many ways to try to stay close to God and grow in Him. And the question is, on this one, what does your spiritual dashboard look like on this parable? How does my dashboard look? Do we still maintain the excitement of learning God's truth? Are there warning lights going off that we're not disciplined? We're not doing our daily prayer. We're not doing our daily meditation, the daily Bible study. Is there a low fuel light going off? Our fuel, the Holy Spirit, is getting very low. If so, well, you know what the corrective action is. With the car, you put more fuel in. We need to take corrective action here too and solve that problem and get more of the Holy Spirit and draw closer to God. And like I mentioned, how does it feel to run out of gas? You're stranded. These 5 foolish virgins were about to run out of oil and be stranded. They weren't going to make it into the wedding party. And I've never run out of gas and hope to never do that. Although that one time I did have a fuel sensor that wasn't working, but I got that fixed. But we need to have this on our spiritual dashboard to see if the warning light is going off of how much fuel, how much Holy Spirit we have in us. We do not want to be stranded. So we'll put that in another column in our dashboard. We now come to the third parable, the parable of the talents. And the parable of the talents is Matthew 25, 14 through 29. And to summarize it, basically, Christ is talking about a man who was traveling to a far country, and he decided to give his servants some talents, which is money. And to one servant he gave 5, to another he gave 2, and to another one he gave 1. And he gave them each to their own ability. That's what Christ said in verse 15. So then, the person who received 5 talents, he made money on that, another 5 talents. He basically doubled his portion. The other 2, the person who got 2 talents doubled his. But then in verse 18, it says, well, the one who received the 1 talent, it says, but he who had received the 1 talent went and dug it in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So obviously he was gone for a long time. So then in verse 20, it talks about how the master came back and he saw the person with 5 talents had gained 5 more talents, and he said, well done. Came back and saw the servant who had the 2 talents and doubled it. He said, well done. But then in verse 24, in Matthew 25, it says the master, then he who had received the 1 talent came and said to the Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And basically he's talking about what God does. We know Christ does that he actually calls people from where he has not scattered seed, but people got called into his church. And verse 25, the servant says, and I was afraid, and I went, and I hid your talent in the ground, and look, there you have what is yours. Can you imagine? I mean, I think it'd be kind of embarrassing to tell your boss, to say, look, boss, you gave me a talent, and look, you still got it. As a boss, boss would be thinking like, well, what did I give this money for? You did nothing with it. You don't want to be in that situation. You wouldn't look good. So then in verse 26, it says, his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has more will be given, and he will have the abundance. But from him who does not have, or even what he has, will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So what do we notice from this parable here on our spiritual dashboard? The first thing we notice here is that God has given us all talents, all kinds of different talents. But what do we do with our talents? You see how the servant who had 5 talents doubled his, and the one with 2 didn't hide their talents in serving God. They used their talents in growing and serving God. And it shows that we need to be good stewards of what God gave us. So maybe on our dashboard, we need to put that in a column. Are we good stewards of what God has given us? And just rank it 1 to 10. Like, am I 10, 5 average, 10 excellent, 1 poor? And what else did we notice about the man who took the 1 talent and buried it? What did we notice about him? Well, the first thing is he said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man. This shows here that he had the wrong perspective of God. His vision was totally warped. He had no idea how God really was. He thought of God as being a very hard man, a very hard person. And be frank, God is not hard. He doesn't want us to be hurt. How many times in the Old Testament did God relent and try to help Israel? Israel was always rebelling against God, and God always relented and tried to give Israel other chances. It's the same thing with us. God always wants to help us. He has laid out his law to us on what he wants us to do, on the right way to obey him. And the other thing we notice is that he was afraid of God. Are we afraid of God? If we are, if it's a 10 on our dashboard, The warning light should be going on. Bing, bling, bling, bling. Why am I afraid of God? Dig deeper, get into it. We shouldn't be afraid of God. So that's a warning light, being afraid of God. So what are we doing with our talents? According to this parable, are there warning lights going off? And if so, you know what? We still got time to fix it. We still have time to go back to the mechanic, to figure it out and get it fixed and get that warning light off. So we want to make sure that we continue to grow in God's way of life. Now, the last parable that Christ gave is Matthew 25 and verses 31 through 46. And this is where Christ is talking about where the Son of Man is going to come and set the sheep on his right hand, the goats on the left. And you know the sheep, what are they known for? Calm, they follow good instructions. The goats, what are they known for? They're rebels. They'll probably kick you from behind if you don't look at them. So that's the point he's making here. So then, to those on the right hand, in verse 34, what Christ is saying, what he'll say to the sheep. Come, you blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. And I was naked, and you clothed me. And I was sick, and you visited me. And I was in prison, and you came to me. So, obviously, the people on the right side, the sheep, they were doing all the right things that Christ expected them to do. They were doing everything right. But those on the left hand, the goats, the rebels, they were not doing that. They said, when did we ever do this to you or to any of our brethren? And then verse 41, then he will say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you're cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food, and he goes so on. He points out they didn't do anything. Didn't help the people, the strangers, didn't help any of their brethren. And they did not make it to the wedding party. They didn't make it into God's kingdom. So what do we notice here? A trait of the good servant here is they help. We help each other. We help other members in God's church. Are we doing things to help our brethren? Are we involved in our local community? Are we letting our light shine? Are we in our neighborhood helping out? And that's something we need to maybe have on our dashboard. I have a column there, helping other people, helping other brethren. How are we doing that? 1 to 10. How well? 5 being average, 10 being great, 1 being very bad. And then on the other side of the coin, we see people who are not concerned for other people. They don't do that. So we want to have that as a warning light on our dashboard. So we went through briefly 4 parables of what Christ went through on how we need to, what we need to be doing to help our spiritual lives out, and so we can make it into the God's kingdom. Do we see warning lights going off? Are they going ding, 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 ding? Oh, I got to fix this. Or are we seeing the good lights in our dashboard saying, fuel is high, all right. Oil level is good, all right. Tire pressure is good, or in a smooth road. Once in a while, it might get a little bumpy there. Tire pressure goes down, got to fix that, and then everything gets better. So basically, we need to look. When we have a warning light goes off, we need to get to the root problem of why that warning light is on, and then have it go off. And then some other things we can put in our dashboard. It can be found in Galatians 5, and we can look at verses 18 through 23. I think we can briefly just go through that for a little bit here. In Galatians 5, it talks about the works of the flesh and the fruits of the Spirit. Basically, it talks about adultery, fornication, uncleanness, licentiousness. Do we have those on our dashboard? Are we doing any of that stuff? Those are warning lights. You want those to be at 1s or 0s. Idolatry, sorcery, hatred. So it's all that stuff. And then if you skip down to number 22, you want those on the dashboard to be at 10s as much as possible. Have that on your dashboard for the fruits of the Spirit. And each of these topics would be a separate sermonette or sermon by itself, like the fruits of the Spirit's love, joy, peace, long-suffering, and so on. So what I hoped today was to show that we have dashboards in a lot of ways in our lives today. We have it in our vehicles. We have it in our airplanes. We find out that they're safety. It's for our safety, for helping us to get to our destination. We have it in our businesses to see how our business is running so it doesn't fall down. We have it in our personal lives, our dashboards. And that shows how your life is going so your life doesn't fall apart. And I hope I brought some light where we can even have a dashboard in our spiritual lives to see how we are. Yes, it takes some work to put a dashboard together. It doesn't happen overnight. We might have to focus on one column at a time and get it working right. But when we see a warning light going off on our dashboards, we need to go in there and dig into it, drill down, and figure out why that warning light is off. And hopefully all the good lights are on. So I hope this was was able to bring to life today about the spiritual dashboard. So let's remember, let's get our spiritual dashboard taken care of. Let's look at the lights in our spiritual dashboard and let's pay attention to our spiritual dashboard. Hope you all have a wonderful Sabbath.